Melody by V.C. Andrews. I think as soon as I was old enough to understand that Mommy and Daddy were having serious arguments, I felt like an outsider. For if I appeared while they were having one, both of them would stop immediately. It made me feel as if I lived in a house with secrets woven into the walls. One day I imagined I would unravel those secrets and the whole house would come down around me. Just a thought. But that's exactly what happened. One day. Chapter 1. The Love Trap. When I was a little girl, I believed that people could get what they wished for if they wished hard enough and long enough and were good enough. And although I'm 15 and long ago stopped believing in things like the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, and the Easter Bunny, I never completely stopped believing there was something magical in the world around us. Somewhere there were angels watching over us, considering our wishes, dreams, and occasionally, when the time was right and we were deserving, they granted us a wish. Daddy taught me this when I was still small enough to sit comfortably on his muscular right forearm and be carried around like a little princess. He would tell me to close my eyes really tight and wish until I saw my angel nearby, her wings fluttering like a bumblebee. Daddy said everyone had an angel assigned to him or her at birth, and the angels did all they could to get humans to believe. He told me that when we were very little, it's much easier to believe in things that the grown-ups would call imagination. That's why when we're little, angels would appear before us sometimes. I think some of us hold on a little longer or a little harder to that world of make-believe. Some of us are not afraid to admit we dream even though we're older. We really do make a wish when we break a chicken bone or blow out our birthday candles or see a shooting star. And we wait and hope and even expect that it'll come true. I did so much wishing as I grew up. I was sure my angel was overworked. I couldn't help it. I always wished my daddy didn't have to go down to the coal mines miles under the earth, away from the sun and the damp, dark canvases of the dust. Just like every other coal miner's child, I had played in the openings and deserted old mines. I couldn't begin to understand what it would be like going down deep and spending the whole day below, the fresh air. But poor Daddy had to do it. As long as I could remember, I wished we lived in a real house instead of a trailer. Even though right next to us, living in their trailer, were Papa George, Grandma Arlene, both of whom I loved dearly. When I wished for a house, I just added a little more and wished that they would live next to ours. We would both have a real backyard and lawns that were big with maple and oak trees. Papa George would help me with my fiddling, and when it rained hard, I wouldn't feel as if I was living in a tin drum. When the wind blew, I wouldn't fear of being turned over while asleep in my bed. My wish list went on and on. I imagine that if I ever took the time and wrote all the wishes down, the paper would stretch from one end of the trailer to the other. I wished hard that Mommy wasn't so unhappy all the time. She complained about having to work in the salon, washing other women's hair and doing perms, even though everyone, she said, was an excellent hairdresser. She did enjoy the gossip and loved to listen to the wealthy women talk about their trips and the things that they had bought. But she was like a little girl who could only look in the window of beautiful things. one who never got to buy any for herself. Even when she was sad, Mommy was beautiful. One of my most frequent wishes was that I would be as pretty as she was when I grew up. When I was younger, I would perch in her bedroom and watch her at her dressing table, meticulously applying her makeup and brushing her hair. As she did so, she preached about the importance of beauty. She told me all the women that she knew who were attractive but neglected themselves and looked simply awful. She told me that if you were born pretty, you had an obligation to look pretty whenever you were in public. That's why I spend so much time on my hair and nails. That's why I have to spend so much money on those special skin creams, she explained. She was always bringing home samples of shampoo and hair conditioners for me to use as well. She brought home perfumed bath oils and would soak in our small tub for over an hour. I would wash her back, or when I was old enough to be trusted, polish her toenails, and she would manicure her fingernails. Occasionally, she did my toenails and styled my hair. People said we looked more like sisters than mother and daughter. I had inherited her small facial features, especially her button nose, but my hair was lighter shade of brown, the hair the color of hay. Once I asked her to dye my hair the same shade as hers, but she shook her head and told me to leave it be, that it was a pretty color. But I wasn't as confident about my looks as she was about hers, even though Daddy told me when he rushed home from work, and now he had the two most beautiful women waiting for him. My daddy stood 6'3" and weighed nearly 190 pounds, all muscle from working in the mines so many years. Although there were times when he returned home after a long day in the mines, aching and moving slowly, he didn't complain. When he set his eyes on me, his face always burst out into happiness. No matter how tired those strong arms of his were, I could run and he'd lift me up into the air. When I was little, I would anxiously wait at the sight of him lumbering up the chick-cracked mines that would lead to our home in the Mineral Acres trailer park. Suddenly, his 6'3" of height would lift up the shock of light brown hair over the ridge, and I could see him taking strides with those long legs. His face and hands would be streaked with coal dust. He looked like a soldier home from battle. Under his right arm clutched a football. It looked like a football, but it was his lunch basket. He made his own sandwiches early in the morning because Mommy was always still asleep when he woke up and got ready for work. Sometimes even before he reached the Mineral Acres, Daddy would lift his head to see me waving. Our trailer was close to the entrance of our front yard that faced the road from Sewell. If he saw me, Daddy would speed up, swinging his coal miner helmet like a flag. Until I was about 12, I had waited close with Papa George and Grandma Arlene's trailer, because Mommy was usually not home from work yet herself. Many times she would go someplace and not make it home in time for dinner. Usually she went to Frankie's bar and grill with her co-workers and friends and listened to the jukebox music. But Daddy was a very good cook, and I got so I could do a lot of the cooking myself too. He and I ended up eating alone more times than not. Daddy didn't complain about Mommy not being there. If I did, he urged me, there'd be more understanding. Your mother and I got married too young, Melody, he told me. But weren't you terribly in love, Daddy? I had just read Romeo and Juliet and knew that you were desperately in love, and that age didn't make a difference. I told my best friend Alice Morgan that I would never marry anyone until I was so head over heels in love I couldn't breathe. She thought that that was an exaggeration, and I would probably fall in love many times before I was married. Daddy's voice was wistful. We were, but we didn't listen to older, wiser heads. We just ran off and eloped without thinking of the consequences. We were both very excited about it and didn't think hard about the future. It was easier for me. I was always more settled, but your mother soon felt as if she had missed out on things. She works in a beauty parlor and hears those rich ladies talking about their trips and their homes, and she gets frustrated. We gotta let her have some freedom so she doesn't feel trapped by all our love for her. How can love trap someone, Daddy? I asked. His smile was wide, a soft smile. When he did that, his green eyes got hazy with a faraway glint. He'd lift his gaze from my face to the window, or sometimes just the wall, as if he were seeing images from a mysterious past float by. Well, if you love someone as much as we love Mommy, you want her around all the time. It's like having a beautiful bird in a cage. You're afraid to let that bird free, and yet you know it would sing a sweeter song if it were. Why doesn't she love us that much too? I demanded. She does, in her own way, he smiled. Your mother is the prettiest woman in this town, for miles and miles around it too, and I know she feels wasted sometimes. That's a hard thing to live with, Melody. People are always coming up to her and telling her that she should be in the movies or on television or a model. She thinks time's flying by and soon it'll be too late for her to be anything else but a housewife. I don't want her to be anything else, Daddy. I know. She's enough for us. We're grateful, but she's always been restless and impulsive. She still has big dreams. And one thing you'll want to do to someone, one thing you'll never want to do to someone you love is kill their dreams. Of course, he continued smiling, I have every reason to believe you're going to be a celebrity in this family. Look at how well Papa George has taught you to play that fiddle. And you can sing too. You're growing into a beautiful young woman. Some talent scout's gonna snap you up. Oh, Daddy, that's silly. No talent scouts are going to come into the mining towns looking for stars. So you'll go to college in New York City, or is it California, he predicted. That's my dream. So don't go dumping dirt on top of it, Melody. I laughed. I was too afraid to have such dreams for myself, yet I was too afraid of being frustrated and trapped like Mommy thought she was now. I wondered why Daddy didn't feel trapped. No matter how hard things were, he would grin and bear it. And he never joined the other miners to drown their sorrows in the bar. He walked to and from work alone because the other miners lived in the shanties in the town. We lived in Sewell, which was a village born from the mine and built by the mining company, in the lap of the small valley. It's the main street with a church, a post office, half a dozen stores, 2 restaurants, and a mortuary, a movie theater that's only open on the weekends. The shanty homes were almost the same pale brown color, built with the side tar papper roofs. But at least the children were my age there. There were no other children near my age living in Mineral Acres Trailer Park. How I wished I had a brother or sister to keep me company. When I told Mommy about that wish once, she grimaced and moaned as if she was only a child herself when she had me. Barely 19, and it's not easy bringing children into the world. It's hard on your body, and you have to worry about getting sick and having enough to eat and having proper clothing, not to mention getting them an education. I rushed into motherhood. I should have waited. Then I would have never been born, I complained. Of course you would have been born, but you would have been born when things were better and not so hard for us. We were right in the middle of the major change in our lives, and it was very difficult. Sometimes she sounded as if she blamed me just for being born. It was as if she thought babies just floated around waiting to be conceived, and occasionally they got impatient and encouraged their parents to create them. That's what I had done. I knew we had moved from Providencetown, Cape Cod, to Sewell in West Virginia before I was born. But we didn't have much at the time. Mommy did tell me when we first arrived in Sewell, as poor as they were, that she was determined not to live in the shanty. So she and Daddy rented a mobile home in the Mineral Acres, even though it was mostly populated by retired people like Papa George. Papa George wasn't really my grandfather, and Grandma Arlene wasn't really my grandmother, but they were still like grandparents to me. Grandma Arlene often looked after me as if I were a little girl. Papa George had been a coal miner and had retired on disability. He was suffering from black lung, which Daddy said was aggravated by his refusal to give up smoking. His illness made him look much older than 62 years. His shoulders slumped. The lines on his pale, tired face were cut deep, and he was so thin that Grandma Arlene claimed that she could weigh him down with a cable knit sweater. Still, Papa George and I had the greatest of times when he helped teach me to fiddle. He had complained that it was Grandma Arlene nagging that wore him down. They always seemed to be bickering, but I didn't know any two people as dedicated to each other as they were. Their arguments were never really mean either. They always ended up laughing. Daddy loved talking with Papa George on the weekends especially. The two could often be found sitting in the rocking chairs on the cement patio under the metal awning, quietly discussing politics in the mining industry. Papa George was in Sewell during the violent times when the mining unions were being formed, and he had lots of stories, which according to Grandma Arlene were not fit for my ears. Why not? He would protest. She ought to know the truth about this place and the people who run it. She got plenty of time to learn about the ugly things in this world, George O'Neill, without you rushing her into it. Hush up. He did, mumbling under his breath until she turned her fiery blue eyes on him, making him swallow the rest of his angry words. But Daddy agreed with Papa George. The miners are being exploited. This was no life for anyone. I never understood why Daddy, who was brought up on Cape Cod in a fisherman's family, ended up working in a place where he was shut away from the sun and sky all day. I knew he missed the ocean, yet he never returned to Cape Cod, and we had nothing to do with Daddy's family. I didn't even know how many cousins I had or their names. I never met or even spoken to my grandparents. All I'd ever seen was a faded black and white photograph of them, with Daddy's father seated and his mother standing beside his father, both looking unhappy about being photographed. His father had a beard that looked as big as Daddy's is now. His mother was wispy looking, with hard, cold eyes. The family in Providencetown was something Daddy didn't discuss. He would always change the subject, just saying, "We just had differences. It's better we're apart. It's easier this way." I couldn't imagine why it was easier, but I saw it was painful for him to talk about it. Mommy never wanted to talk about it either. Just bringing up the family caused her to start crying and complaining to Daddy's about his family, always thinking little of her because she'd been an orphan. She told me that she was adopted by people who said that she was too old to raise as a child. They were both in their 60s when she was a teenager, and they were very strict. She said she couldn't wait to get away from them. I wanted to know more about them and about Daddy's family too, but I was afraid it would start an argument between her and Daddy, so after a while I just stopped asking questions. But that did not stop their arguments. One night, soon after I'd gone to bed, I heard their voices rising against each other. They were in their bedroom too. The trailer home had a small kitchen to the right of the main entrance, a little dinette, and a living room. Down a narrow hallway was the bathroom. My bedroom was the first on the right, and Daddy's and Mommy's was at the end of the trailer. "Don't tell me I'm imagining things," Daddy warned, his voice cross. "The people dropping hints ain't liars, Haley," he said. I sat up in bed and listened. It wasn't hard to hear normal conversations through the paper-thin trailer walls as it was, but with them yelling at each other, it was as if I was in the room with them. "They're not liars. They're busybodies with nothing else to do with their boring, worthless lives than manufacture tales about other people. If you don't give them a chance..." "What am I supposed to do, Chester? The man is a bartender at Frankie's. He talks to everyone, not just me," she whined. I knew they were arguing about Archie Marlin. I never mentioned it to Daddy, but twice that I knew of, Archie drove Mommy home. Archie had short orange-red hair and skin the shade of milkweed with freckles on his chin and forehead. Everyone said he looked 10 years younger than he really was, although no one knew his exact age. No one knew very much about Archie Marlin. He never gave anyone a straight answer to a question about himself. He joked or shrugged and said something silly. Supposedly, he had been brought up in Michigan or Ohio, and he'd spent 6 months in jail for forging checks. I never understood why Mommy liked him. She said he's full of good stories and had been to a lot of exciting places like Las Vegas. She said it again now during the argument in the bedroom. "At least he's been places. I can learn from him," she asserted. "It's just talk. He hasn't been anywhere," Daddy charged. "How would you know it's just talk, Chester? You're the one who hasn't been anywhere but the Cape and this trap called Sewell. And you brought me to it." "You brought yourself, Haley," he retorted, and suddenly she stopped arguing and started crying. Moments later, he was comforting her so softly I couldn't hear what he was saying when they grew quiet. I didn't understand what it all meant. How did Mommy bring herself here? Why would she bring herself to a place she didn't like? I lie awake thinking. There were always those deep silences between Mommy and Daddy. Gaps they were just both afraid to fill. Then the arguments would pass, just as this one did. And it would be as if nothing ever happened. Nothing was ever said. It was as if they declared a truce over and over because they both knew if they didn't, something terrible might happen. Something terrible might be said. Nothing was as mysterious to me as love between a man and a woman. I had crushes on boys at school and was sort of seeing Bobby Lockwood more than any other boy. Since my best friend Alice was the smartest girl in school, I thought she might know something about love, even though she'd never had a boyfriend. She was nice but unpopular because she was about 25 pounds overweight and her mother made her keep her hair in pigtails. She wasn't allowed to wear any makeup, not even lipstick. Alice read more than anyone I knew, so I thought that maybe she had come across some book that explained love. She thought a moment after I asked her. She replied it was something scientific. That's the only way to explain it, she claimed in her usual manner. Don't you think it's something magical? I asked her. On Wednesday afternoons, she would come over to our trailer after school and study with me for our weekly Thursday geometry test. It was more for my benefit than hers, because she was ending up tutoring me. I don't believe in magic, she said dryly. She was not very good at pretending. I was actually her only real friend. Maybe partly because she was too brutally honest with her opinions when it came to other girls at school. Well then, why is it, I demanded, that a man will look at one woman specially and a woman will do the same, look at one man specially? Something's got to happen between them, doesn't it? I insisted. Alice pressed down on her thick lower lip. Her big brown round eyes moved side to side as if she were reading words printed in the air. She had the habit of chewing on the side of her left cheek too, when she was in deep thought. The girls in school would giggle and say, Alice is eating herself again. Well, she said after a long pause, we know we're all made of protoplasm. Ugh. And chemical things happen between cells, she continued, nodding. Stop it. So maybe a certain man's protoplasm has a chemical reaction to a certain woman's protoplasm. Something magnetic. It's just the positive and negative of atoms reacting. But people make it seem like it's more, she concluded. It is more, I insisted. It has to be. Don't your parents think it's more? Alice shrugged. They never forget each other's birthdays or anniversaries, she said, making it sound as if it was the only thing about being in love and married. Alice's father, William, was Sewell's dentist. Her mother was his receptionist. So they did spend a great deal of time together. But whenever I went to have my teeth checked, I noticed that she called her husband Dr. Morgan, as if she wasn't his wife, but merely his employee. Alice had two brothers, both older. Her brother Neil had already graduated and gone to college, and her brother Tommy was a senior and sure to be the class valedictorian. Do they ever have arguments, I asked her, bad arguments? I wondered if it was just something my mommy and daddy did. Not terribly bad, and very rarely in front of anyone, she said. Usually it's about politics. Politics? I couldn't even imagine Mommy caring about politics. She always walked away when Daddy and Papa George got into one of their discussions. Yes, I hope when I get married, I said, I never have to be in an argument with my husband. That's an unrealistic hope. People who live together must have some conflict. It's natural. But if they do, and they're in love, they always make up and feel terrible about hurting each other. I suppose, Alice relented, but that might be just to keep the peace. Once my parents didn't talk to each other for nearly a week. I think it's when they argued about their last presidential election. A week? I thought for a moment. Even though Mommy and Daddy had their arguments, they always spoke to each other soon after and acted like nothing happened. Didn't they kiss each other goodnight? I don't know. I don't think they do that. They don't ever kiss goodnight? Alice shrugged. Maybe. Of course they kiss. They must have had sex to have your brothers and you. Well, that means they are in love. Why? Alice asked with her brown eyes narrowing into skeptical slits. I told you why. You can't have sex without being in love. Sex doesn't have anything to do with it per se, she lectured. Sexual reproduction is a natural process performed by all living things. It's built into species. Ugh. Stop saying ugh after everything I say. You sound like Thelma Cross, she said, and then she smiled. Ask her about sex. Why? I was in the bathroom yesterday and overheard her talking to Paula Temple about... What? You know. I widened my eyes. Who was she with? Tommy Geets. I can't repeat the things she said, Alice nodded, blushing. Sometimes I wonder, I said, sitting back on my pillow, if you and I aren't the only virgins left in our class. So, I'm not ashamed of it if it's true. I'm not ashamed, I'm just... What? Curious. And certainly curiosity killed the cat, Alice warned, and she narrowed her round eyes. How far have you gone with Bobby Lockwood? Not far, I said. She was suddenly staring at me hard, and I had to look away. Remember Beverly Marks, she warned. Beverly Marks was infamous. The girl in our 8th grade class who had gotten pregnant and sent away. To this day, no one knows where she went. Don't worry about me, I said. I will not have sex with anyone I don't love. Alice shrugged skeptically. She was annoying me. I sometimes wondered why I stayed friends with her. Let's get back to work. And she opened up the textbook and ran her fingers down the page. Okay, the main part of tomorrow's test will probably be... Suddenly we both looked up and listened. Car doors were being slammed and someone was crying hard and loudly. What's that? I went to the window in my bedroom. I looked out of the entrance of the Mineral Acres. A few of Mommy's co-workers got out of Lewis Norton's car. Lewis was the manager of the beauty parlor. The rear door was open and Lewis helped Mommy out. Mommy was crying uncontrollably and being supported by 2 other women as they helped her toward the front door of the trailer. Another car pulled up behind Louis Norton's with 2 other women in it. Mommy suddenly let out a piercing scream. My heart raced and I felt my legs turn to stone and my feet seemed nailed to the floor. Grandma Arlene and Papa George came out of their trailer to see what was happening. I recognized Martha Staple talking to them. Papa George and Grandma Arlene suddenly embraced each other tightly. Grandma had her hand to her mouth. Then Grandma rushed towards Mommy, who was now nearing up to our front steps. Tears streamed down my cheeks, mostly from fear. Alice stood like a stone herself, anticipating. What happened? She whispered. I shook my head. I somehow managed to walk out of my room just as the front door opened. Mommy took a deep breath when she saw me. Oh, Melody, she cried. Mommy, I started to cry. What's the matter? I asked through my sobs. There's been a terrible accident. Daddy and 2 other miners are dead. A long sigh escaped from Mommy's choked throat. She swayed and would have fallen if Grandma Arlene hadn't been holding on to her. However, her eyes went bleak dark, haunted. Despair had drained her face of its radiance. I shook my head. It couldn't be true. Yet there was Mommy clutching Grandma Arlene, her friends beside her, all with horrible, tragic faces. "No!" I screamed and plowed through the front of everyone, down the stairs, outside and away, with my hands over my ears. I was running, unaware of which direction I had taken, and that I had left the house without a coat, and it was the middle of one of the coldest Februaries. I had run all the way to the Mongolia River bend before Alice caught up with me, and I was standing there on the hill embracing myself, gasping and crying at the same time, just gazing dumbly at the beach and the hickory and the white oak trees at the other side of the river. A white-tailed deer appeared and gazed curiously at the sound of my sobs. I shook my head until it felt like it would snap off my neck, but I somehow already knew all the no's in the world wouldn't change things. I felt the world horribly altered. I cried until my insides ached. I heard Alice calling, and I turned to her, gasping for breath as she chugged her way up the hill to where I was standing. She tried to hug and comfort me. I pulled away. "They're lying," I screamed hysterically. "They're lying. Tell me they're lying." Alice shook her head. "They said the walls caved in, and by the time they got to your father and the others..." "Daddy," I moaned, "poor Daddy." Alice bit her lower lip and waited for me to stop sobbing. "Aren't you cold?" she asked. "What difference does it make?" I snapped angrily. "What difference does anything make?" She nodded. Her eyes were red too, and she shivered more from her sadness than the wintry day. "Let's go back," I said, speaking with the voice that was dead to myself. She walked beside me silently. I don't know how I got my legs to take those steps, but when we returned to the trailer park, the women who had brought Mommy home were gone. Alice followed me into the trailer. Mommy was on the sofa with a wet washcloth on her forehead, and Grandma Arlene was beside her. Mommy reached up to take my hand, and I fell to the floor beside the sofa with my head on her stomach. I thought I was going to heave everything up that I had eaten that day. A few moments later, when I looked up, Mommy was asleep. Somewhere deep inside herself, she was still crying, I thought, crying and screaming. "Let me make you a cup of tea," Grandma Arlene said quietly. "Your nose is beet red." I didn't reply. I just sat there on the floor beside the sofa, still holding Mommy's hand. Alice stood by the doorway awkwardly. "I better go home," she said, "and tell my parents." I think I nodded, but I wasn't sure. Everything around me seemed distant. Alice got her books and paused at the doorway. "I'll come back later," she said, "okay?" After she left, I lowered my head and cried softly until I heard Grandma call me and then touch my arm. "Come sit with me, child. Let your mother sleep." I rose and joined her at the table. She poured 2 cups of tea and sat. "Go on, drink it." I blew on the hot water and took a sip. When Papa George was down in the mines, I always worried about something like this happening. There were always accidents of one sort or another. "We ought to leave the coal alone, find another source of energy," she said bitterly. "He can't really be dead, Grandma Arlene, not Daddy." I smiled at her and tilted my head. "He'll be coming home soon, won't he? It's a mistake. Soon he'll be coming over the hill swinging his lunch basket." "Child, no. Grandma Arlene, You don't understand. Daddy has an angel looking over him. His angel wouldn't let such a terrible thing happen. It's all a mistake. They'll dig the mine and find Daddy. They already found him and the other poor souls, honey. She reached across the table to take my hand. You've got to be strong for your mother, Melody. She's not very strong, you know. There's a lot of hardship to endure these next few days. The whole town is mourning. I gazed at Mommy, her eyes shut and her mouth slightly open. She's so pretty, I thought. Even now, she's so pretty. She's too young to be a widow. I drank some more tea and then I got up and put on my coat. I went out to stand near the front entrance and gazed down the road. As I stood there, I closed my eyes and wished as hard as I could that this wasn't true, that Daddy would soon call out to me. Please, I begged my angel, I don't care if you don't grant me another but this one. I took a deep breath and opened my eyes. The road was empty. It was twilight. Long shadows crept over the macadam. The sky was turned an angry gray, and tiny particles of snow began to appear. The wind picked up. I heard a door slam and turned to see Papa George emerge from the trailer. He looked over at me, and then he sat in his rocker and lit a cigarette. He rocked and stared at the ground. I gazed once more at the hill. Daddy wasn't there. He was gone forever.